Hello, I'm Oliver from 7th Memory, and welcome to Devlog number 6. So this week is all about the layout of these first few levels that we've already worked on, the Dark Forest and the Fort. So far, we've been working on a vertical slice of our game. So we've been locking in on everything up to this boss that we've talked about of Jay's brother before continuing. Therefore, we're setting up all of these long-term systems at once, and then we just add content. But as we've been working on the slice, we've been working on trying to get a little demo of this first chapter. So we've worked on laying out a lot of the level design and the areas for the Dark Forest and the Fort. So let's start with just a very quick recap as to what happens in terms of this level and the area before actually showing them off. So first things first, Zara explores this Dark Forest with the goal of getting to the fort and finding the people who've been missing from the town. So they eventually find the fort, make their way inside through a big drawbridge, go through the first level of the fort, make their way into the dungeon, they find the big bad wizard and lose, get thrown out into the river, float back to near town. They get found in a new area of the forest by Jay. They explore a different area of the Dark Forest, the darker forest, and with the goal of getting to the fort again. They find a new entrance to the fort that leads straight to this dungeon, look around, find nothing, then start climbing the wizard's tower. They fight him there, they win, end of chapter. This dungeon base area is laid out in drawings, but the Dark Forest area is at least a little bit more in the game, so let's show it off. Zara's adventure starts with them going into the Dark Forest from the town. At first, they just kind of walk through normal forest area. There's a minor puzzle or two, activating this bridge, and then they go into the Dark Forest proper after crossing the river. Here you can see that there's off to the north this closed off path that requires both the lantern that would light Bramble on fire and Jay's gliding ability to cross pits in order to actually get across, which connects to the darker forest from later. At this point, Zara starts to go down another area. Right now, this is mostly just placeholder skeleton of an area, but we have a layout. These rooms will later be full of puzzles and enemies and things like that. The idea is that they go along this southern path going east. They eventually reach the occasional dead end that has some treasure and the like, and then they start to make their way more to the north to actually reach the fort area. As part of this, there's planned to be a Dark Forest maze that the player can later revisit with the lantern as a way of showing off just how useful the lantern can be. And that about does it for this first pass through the Dark Forest. Now let's get into what the fort area is going to look like. First, you walk into the area and you get a nice view of the front of the fort. You have to look around, it's raining, there's braziers, there's some enemies around. But the idea is that here Zara needs to go to both sides of the fort, do some sort of little puzzle, and open up the drawbridge. For now, we just have the little area with the front of the fort and a little button to open the drawbridge, but later there will be puzzles on both sides. That's the extent of what we have actually in the game for the fort, but we have planned out a general idea of what the rest of the fort is going to look like in terms of the map. The way this is structured is that when Zara enters the fort, they go in through a little gatehouse, and they quickly find themselves in a pretty big open courtyard. The way the dungeon is structured in terms of gameplay is that the player is going to try to avoid big groups of guard, floodlights, that kind of thing. It's doing a little bit of stealth to try and get to the dungeon in some way. That means that they'll be going around the entirety of the fort in a circle, sort of sticking to the edges, going in through rooms, fighting guards, finding keys, etc., with the goal of eventually finding the key that leads into the dungeon so they can go in and find those missing people. The idea is for the vibe with this fort to be kind of similar to Wind Waker's Forsaken Fortress. As part of going through this fort, we've started to think about some of the rooms they would go through. There's barracks, an armory, a forge, a mess hall, a kitchen, etc., that kind of thing, as well as 3 different guard towers and a room that leads to the dungeons and to this wizard's tower, which is for now, just a thing for later. Now, once they get into the dungeon layer, that part hasn't necessarily been laid out yet, but it will feature more winding paths instead of the easily comprehensible fort base level map that's just a circle. And then at the end of it, they find and fight this wizard. So then we get into this darker forest. This is back in the dark forest area from before, except now Zara is found by Jay, and the two of them start to explore together. They start from a different area of the forest and start to make their way through more of these winding paths, fighting enemies, solving puzzles, etc., until eventually reaching the fort from a different side. The idea with this darker forest is that as the player explores the previous area, they would see a lot of inaccessible ledges, things sort of off in the distance that they're not entirely sure how to reach. And then when they actually get to make a second pass to the forest, they get to see all of them and get that chest that was way out of the way. Eventually, when the player reaches the fort again, they're able to go in, go through this dungeon level, and then start to explore this whole wizard's tower, which is mostly just going up various staircases, doing more puzzles, things like that. The idea, though, is that also while exploring this fort area with Jay, there's more puzzles based on it. There's areas where you have to use more of the jumping and go between different floating platforms, things like that, especially as you start to get higher and higher in altitude and get close to the proper final boss. And that's our area overview. That's the Dark Forest, the fort area, the darker forest, and the wizard's tower and other parts of the fort. Make sure to check out our most recent monthly recap on Substack. In it, I go over all of the most recent development that we've had this month. All of the art we've made, Weather and Darkness systems, the history of the world, general story, prefabs, and of course, some of the layouts of these rooms. If you're interested in these past recent videos in text form with a few extra details thrown in and some GIFs and things like that, make sure to check it out. Alright, thanks so much. Max will see you next week.